Well, speaking of petitions, how come the G81 M3 Touring petition didn't go through?
Oh, boy.
If we're talking about US and Europe, maybe we talk about this a little bit too.
We did talk about this at one point, yeah. All right, well, the background there is that Tourings have not done typically very well in the US market. We've had them in the market before, and at a certain point, the sales were dropping. And we were given tasks to reduce the number of variants because every variant, every model of car you bring into the U.S. has to be homologated to be sold, certified, all that, and there's and have parts for it. So there's cost to having every different model in the country. And if you're selling 200 cars, is it worthwhile doing anymore? And the wagon was one of the cars that we said, okay, well, we don't need it. We have strong X3 products coming. There's the X1 coming, and X5 is always strong. So, okay, that's when we can cut. And I was in those meetings, and there's no defending it. I mean, the numbers just didn't add up. And Munich came back to us and said, okay, well, if you say you don't want the Touring, we will optimize the body structure for European crash test standards, and it probably won't U.S. standards, because in the U.S. there are certain standards, and then there are certain you should also meet because publicly it's seen. So IHS standards, for example, which are very difficult to hit, as well as hitting the normal worldwide crash standards. So we said, yeah, we don't need the car. At that point in time, it was just a number code. There was no, it was an F code. At the time, there was no M3 even being thought about. And I doubt that it really would have made a difference at that point, because this was several years before the M3 Touring was released. And then, at that point, the ship had sailed. And when the M3 Touring was announced, there was a group that studied whether it was feasible to do, and it just wasn't feasible to do for what people would pay for it. And so no M3 Touring. But you have the M5 Touring.
That is true.
So, I get a different price point, different kind of car, but we decided, okay, well, we couldn't do it with that car, but we know early enough we can do it with the M5.
Yeah, and that petition is going to get a new life next week, or by the time this podcast goes live, because they're going to see a CS version of it. So they're going to be like, why?
But I think to go back, I also think that I don't think the M3, you would know better, Tom, but I don't think the M3 Touring was ever decided on until the M3s were doing so well. And then they decided maybe to make that. And it was sort of, instead of it being in the planning from BMW, which is what some other conversations we had with some people, because it wasn't in the long-term plan, it could easily be done because of the standard 3 Series Tourings being available in Europe. So they could adapt different things to make that work, while over here we have zero.
Yeah.
In fact, F31, I believe, is the last 3 Series Touring that was here, and those were 328s. We don't see Tourings at all. And I'll just add one thing. When the E61 M5 was released, I know we're on 3 Series, but I have to mention this because we're on Touring. I was on the petition there was one on M5 board. There was a bunch of people that wanted the E61 M5 Touring.
Right.
And there was belief, because of what had happened with E30 from the past, that if enough people were there, they would bring the car over. And it was a similar response, because they knew they weren't going to sell. Maybe a deposit would make that work. That did not happen, as everyone knows. And it didn't. It's not going to happen with the J81, but that's why I jumped on and got the M5 Touring, because I want to have a Touring, but also for the M5 perspective, it really, I want them to do well, and I think they will do pretty well with those.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on from that one, because it's
the controversial topic.
Yeah, not just that, but you can talk about that. I guess to really put a pin in that is the fact that I guess no one anticipated the demand for the M3 Touring. I guess that's pretty fair to say.
I would say I'm going to be a bit of a skeptic. There are some people that love Tourings, and I've had several BMW Tourings in my company cars over the years, but we've never done very well with Tourings in this market. And there's always a faction that says, I want a Touring, but when you do it, they don't step up. And I've stood in front of a crowd of 500 people at BMW Car Club events, and they say, "Well, we want the Touring." It's like, guys, we've had this Touring for years, and we sell like 500 of them in a year. That means everyone in this room are the people buying them. Oh, how does this? And I've said to them, they say the dealers don't have them in stock, so that's why we don't sell them. No, you can order a car, right? You know that. Yeah. So you order the car, you order the spec you want, and you have to buy it new, because if you wait for it to be used, you're not helping here, right?
Yeah, but I think there's certain models that strengthen certain brands. Like, and I'll talk about GT models, for example, which we have a lot of GTs that we service, 3 Series GTs, 6 Series and 5 Series GTs. And those customers that have a GT love the cars to death, and they will maintain and service them like crazy. And I never see those models ever driving. I mean, those are probably some of the rarest cars that we work on at the shop, to be honest. But every person is the same. Every person that's bringing us those cars wants to keep them on the road because they love that. And I feel like that's the Touring guys too. You're right. I think a lot of people want to talk, but when it comes time to buy and it comes time to choose, they don't choose it. They choose the X3M. Sure. They don't choose the G81 if it was there. But I think it for the enthusiast, like Porsche, to bring Porsche up, they have the Taycan wagon and some other wagons that I know don't probably do well. But the fact that they offer them to those enthusiasts, I think helps strengthen the brand. So I think there is some argument with that. And I think the M5 will do that. I think that is I think it's a better car as a 5 Series, a Touring.
I will say it is a little bit easier to do at a higher price point. So Taycan Cross, I can't remember the name.
Yeah, Cross Turismo.
I think
Cross
so.
Turismo, something like that. Yeah, it's an expensive car. And,
it is.
And so at the price point of an M5 Touring and that, it's a little bit easier to do. You can amortize the cost of certification and all that, or development and certification over a smaller group of cars, and still make some money at the end.
Gotcha.
For us, it's about the business case, unfortunately, and every car, every model that's brought in is looked at from a cost benefit, and it just didn't pencil. Gotcha. And ultimately, it didn't pencil for the GTs either. Mm-hmm. So, what can you do?
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of 1Ms, we'll go off track a little bit, but the 1M that we have in the BMW USA collection is Valencia orange, but if you open the hood, it's white. Car got to Daytona, and there was a lot of fog that year, so it became the pace car just by IMSA said, "That's a good-looking car. Can we use it as a pace car?" And we went, "Yep, here you go." Now it's much more regimented. You have to plan this advance, but back in those days, you could.